You are live.
Thank you. Is everyone ready?
Mhm.
All right. I'd like to call to order our Board of Education work session. It's 7:01, and I'd like to welcome our audiences. And we are going to begin tonight with a very special guest. Please, everyone, welcome my new friend, Christian Greer. Christian is a virtual campus transitional kindergarten student. I see him waving there in the background, and he is going to actually lead us in our Pledge of Allegiance. So Christian, go ahead, make sure you're unmuted and nice and loud. Take it away here.
Okay. Hello, my name is Kristen, and I am TK, and I'm going to say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, and liberty and justice for all. Adios. Have a good meeting.
Thank you, Christian. Appreciate it. Thanks to you and your parents. Thanks for kicking us off tonight, and have a good rest of your evening. Thank you very much for being here. Bye-bye. All right. Well, with that, we'll get started. I would like to start with a roll call, and we have all of our board members present for this work session. And I just wanted to note that, as you know, this work session is being held virtually. The most recent order on in-person gatherings published by the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services on February 4th, which took effect February 8th, remains in effect until March 29th of 2021. So per this order, indoor gatherings are prohibited at non-residential venues, except where no more than 10 persons from no more than 2 households are gathered. So a gathering is actually defined as any occurrence, either indoor or outdoor, where 2 or more persons from more than 1 household are present in a shared space. And that unfortunately prohibits our meetings from being in person. Believe me, all of us on this call can't wait to get back to in-person meetings and in-person work sessions. We'll do that as soon as we are able to. And we did seek an opinion on this from our legal counsel, as we rely heavily on them just a couple hours ago, in fact. So I wanted to state that for the record. So with that, I'll just welcome everyone again who's watching either on Zoom or at home on YouTube Live, and just mention that this is a public work session of the board. We do have a few opportunities for board members to comment. First of all, you can apply as usual to speak at the beginning of our meeting. That form is on our website under Board of Education. Those applications are due by noon Wednesday prior to our meeting, and tonight we have 1 individual who has applied to speak under that citizens requesting placement on the agenda item. In addition, we have opportunity for public comment at the end of our work session. If you'd like to comment, please raise your hand in Zoom. Once you click that raise hand button, you will get a form from our administrators on this meeting, and they'll ask you to fill that out. It'll ask for your name and information to contact you to follow up, and we'll just briefly ask what you wish to speak to. So I guess without further ado, we will get started. We have the first item on the agenda is communications, and I will ask Michelle, our secretary, to let our audience know what communications have been received since our last meeting.
Good evening. The Board of Education received 8 communications through the RCS website since our prior meeting. District grandparent Mary Ann Kirstein contacted the board regarding vaccinations for staff. District teachers Sarah Mollick and Catherine Likens contacted the board regarding vaccinations and safety protocols. District parents Julie Parks, Lori Madigan, and Christine Larkins contacted the board regarding returning to full-time in-person instruction. District parent Deanna Harless contacted the board regarding summer learning opportunities. We also received emails that did not go through the RCS website, and those are not published in our board packet, and we've received those from 6 people. Tabitha Cronander, Mary Miller, and David Recknagel contacted us regarding a desire for full-time in-person instruction. Pat Wood contacted us to express gratitude for a middle school winter sports season. David Recknagel contacted us a second time for clarification of the secondary schedule. And Jessica Nowak and Debbie Olszewski wrote us regarding concerns about returning to full-time in-person instruction. And that was the extent of the emails that went to the full board.
Thank you, Michelle. Next, we have citizens requesting placement on the agenda. I have one citizen who has requested placement in this way. So Andrew Weaver. Andrew, I'll allow you to speak if you can introduce yourself, and then you have 3 minutes to speak. So Andrew, I'm not able to unmute you. Andrew, I'm going to have our administrators on the meeting try to troubleshoot you. I did get an error message when I tried to unmute you, so we'll try to get this worked out and figure out how you can speak. In the meantime, we'll go on with our agenda and we can come back to this. Members of the Board of Education, do any board members have any communications that they wish to detail for the rest of the board? I don't see any hands raised. I have several. So I have Jackie Wood. I received emails from Jackie Wood, Denise Reed, Lara Cornish, Brad Scott, Leanne Leake, State Representative Mark Tisdall, Jessica Opfer. I also had a phone conversation with Jessica Opfer about concerns about returning to school and about the board work in general. And next on our agenda, we have our work session. So we have 2 items tonight that we'll be talking through, and our administration will lead us in those items. And the first one is budget amendments. And I believe that I'm going to turn that over to Matt, potentially.
Yes, thank you.
Or Dana. Okay, Matt McDaniel. Thank you. Our business operations director here. Go ahead, Matt.
All right. Well, thank you, Madam President, and good evening, everyone. Tonight, we were presenting our budget amendment that we will ask the board to approve at the March 8th Board of Ed regular meeting. We typically go through the budget amendment in detail before each regular meeting. So tonight, we're going to go through that. We took a little bit of a different format just because this has been quite a different year. So we're going to start off by a timeline and show some of the different budgetary impacts that we've faced since the beginning of the pandemic. So I'd like to start off, and I'm actually going to take some time and go through these in detail because there's different impacts that all of these events had on the budget. So looking at May 1st, Michigan Department of Education awarded the first round of ESSER funds. The ESSER allocation is based on the Title I funding formula, and the district must apply for these funds, and the MDE, the Michigan Department of Education, must approve the funds and the budget that we submit before funds can be spent. And that'll be important later on. On May 15th, the May 2020 revenue or consensus revenue estimating conference projected a shortfall in the state school aid fund budget. For Rochester schools, luckily there was some foresight from Dr. Shaner and Dana Taylor that we were able to make some tough decisions to lay off contracted third-party employees to help save the budget because we did anticipate that there was going to be a shortfall in the school aid fund. In May, the Consensus Revenue Estimating Conference forecasted a $1.24 billion shortfall in the state school aid fund. On June 15th, we asked the RCS Board of Education to approve the 2021 general fund budget with the assumption of a $500 per pupil loss. That was a $8.3 million loss in revenue overall a 6.7 million reduction in expenditures so that we would have as close to a balanced budget as possible based on a lot of unknown factors, which was an estimated loss or use of fund balance of 1.7 million. As a reminder, school districts are required by law to adopt a budget by June 30th of each year. And on June 30, the district's 1920 fiscal year ended. We'll see later on July 22nd, that Governor Whitmer signed a supplemental funding bill for the 1920 fiscal year. So that fiscal year that ended on June 30, because of the anticipated shortfall in the state school aid fund, we received payments in July and August, which is our greatest funding source, is state aid. So on July 22nd, they announced that they were going to cut our funding by $175 per student. But fortunately, due to the federal stimulus, they were going to provide an additional $350 per student through the coronavirus relief funds and the budget stabilization fund through the state of Michigan. On July 1st, the district's 2021 fiscal year began. And on August 4th, shortly after the governor signed that supplemental funding bill, guidance clarifies that revenue recognition does not allow for ESSER or the coronavirus relief funds at $350 per student to be recorded for the 1920 fiscal year. So accountants got together and said, this doesn't follow any of the normal federal rules. This doesn't follow generally accepted accounting principles. So there's no way that this money that was allocated for the 1920 year should be able to be applied for the 1920 year that ended June 30th because it was never awarded until July 22nd. So next, as we move through the timeline, we'll look at August 20th. This was important because the governor signed Public Acts 147, 148, and 149. These laws modified attendance requirements to require two-way interactions, and for us as a school district to report participation rates. Now, initially, when this was released on August 20th, two-way interactions include attendance during a live lesson, either in person or through a synchronous platform, completion of an assignment, or documented interaction regarding course content with teacher through email, telephone, or other synchronous platform. There is a challenge with the documented interaction regarding course content. It's got to be very specific. So a teacher cannot reach out to a student and say, hey, do you need any help with that assignment? They need to talk about specifics, right? Do you need help with long division? And there's got to be a conversation response from that student back regarding course content, and then a follow-up from that teacher to close that one two-way interaction. There's two required under one of our measurements, and for count purposes, there is one per week required. On August 24th, the Consensus Revenue Estimating Conference forecasted an increase in the school aid fund of about $1 billion. This was an increase from the May estimate and was really a result of the federal stimulus money. And looking at the next school year, the 2021 fiscal year, conference estimates an increase of $321.5 million, but still a total net reduction compared to the original estimate of $815.6 million. So we're still down $815.6 million in this school aid fund. On September 30th, Governor Whitmer signs the school aid fund budget. The state budget includes a restoration of the $175 per pupil cut that was approved for the 1920 school year, and also includes a one-time only $65 per pupil increase. The law also expanded two-way interactions to include overall academic performance and or grade progression. So another piece that's important to note is that our fiscal year begins on July 1st, as we showed in the timeline prior to this. So we had no idea what the funding level per student was going to be until September 30th, right? We were 3 months into our fiscal year before we had any idea what that funding level was going to be. On November 9th, the RCS Board of Education approves the general fund budget amendment. The budget includes an increase of $15.6 million in revenue now that we know the budget or the per pupil funding, as well as the addition of those funds that accountants said couldn't be applied to the 1920 school year as the state legislature had preferred. There was also an increase of 13.9 million in expenditures, but an estimated addition rather than a use of fund balance of about $100,000. Moving on to January 13th, the second round of ESSER estimated allocations were shared. Now this ESSER 2, the second round of ESSER funds have not been officially allocated yet. We're still waiting on that. But again, they use the Title I funding formula, and ESSER round 2 is expected to be about 4 times the amount of ESSER 1. Next, we'll look at, again, the consensus revenue estimating conference in January. There was a forecast of an increase of $450 million in the school aid fund for the 1920 fiscal year. For 2021, another increase of $528.3 million, but still a total net reduction of $287.3 million. And the 21-22 fiscal year conference estimated $14.423 billion, which was down from the prior year total. On January 19th, Governor Whitmer announces she's asking the state legislature to pass a $1.7 billion education supplemental budget to appropriate the available ESSER funds, as well as $300 million in school aid revenue. This really hasn't gone anywhere other than the Michigan House of Representatives passing their own version of an educational supplemental budget bill. We haven't heard from the House, from the Senate. I believe they have a plan, but they have not formally passed that through the Senate. On February 11th, Governor Whitmer released her 21-22 executive budget, but again, we still need to wait on the House and the Senate to pass that budget or pass their own versions of their budget and some negotiation to occur. Now remember that the last budget wasn't passed until September 30th, 3 months into our fiscal year. Tonight, we are presenting the budget amendment in detail to the RCS Board of Education, and on March 8th, we'll present the RCS or the budget to the RCS board for approval. Now, there are some things that we always consider with a budget recommendation, right? We want it to be balanced, equitable, it needs to be sustainable, it minimizes impact on student programming, it uses a team-based approach, it provides ongoing communication to promote transparency and openness, and that's why we do this budget presentation in detail. But since COVID, there's been a heightened emphasis on some other areas, right? There could be an immediate reduction in available resources, right? If these federal stimulus don't provide increased tax revenue, we could be looking at what we were last summer, a potential proration if people don't spend the stimulus money. And you'll remember last year, our fiscal year ended on June 30th, and in August they said, all right, now we don't have the money, so neither do the schools. We also prioritize highly effective programs, look for any operational efficiencies, and conduct a cost benefit analysis with our major decisions. We also promise to use fund balance as responsibly as possible. So let's talk a little bit about general fund budget revenue. Local revenues made up of property taxes and tuition-based programs for the most part. State revenue is our per pupil foundation allowance, the public school retirement system, special education reimbursement costs, Section 31A. Federal revenue, there's COVID-19 funds, including coronavirus relief funds and ESSER. Title funds, Title 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then there's inter-district sources like P18, the county special education millage. So let's talk a little bit about the Title I Part A funding formula. Now, typically this means $300,000 to $400,000 for us per year. Title I Part A funding formula is based on students living in poverty. It's a complicated calculation. It's not quite as easy as the per pupil foundation allowance that we'll talk about next. For us, there are 569 students that qualify as Title I Part A eligible students. Based on census data, we know that there's 16,117 children from the ages of 5 to 17, right? So you do some math, and that means a poverty rate of 3.53%. There's also a hold harmless component of Title I, and depending on your poverty level, that could be set at 85, 90, or 95%. Because our poverty rate is 3.53%, it's set at 85%. So each state receives their share allocated by a total state per pupil spending. We also know that the federal government doesn't fully fund Title I. The need is greater than the amount available. So to try to simplify this calculation a little bit, total Title I available for the federal government times Michigan per pupil spending divided by all state per pupil spending. And that's all the states in the union, right? 50 states in the District of Columbia. Now, why are we talking about a funding formula that means $300,000 to $400,000 on a $190 million budget? Well, it's because of ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 is using this funding formula. So as we look at ESSER 1 and 2, you'll see that for us, that meant $252,916 for the first round of ESSER. And when we look at the 28 school districts in Oakland County, the average reward was $515,710. The largest award was $4,260 or $260,253. And if we look at a larger picture in the state, the largest award in the state was almost $85 million, which is approximately 10% of that district's budget. So ESSER 2 is expected to be roughly 4 times the amount of ESSER 1. So for a district like us, that means about $1 million. For the largest award in Oakland County, that means $17 million. And for the largest award in the state, that's $340 million. That means that district received about half of their general operating budget, their general fund budget, in ESSER money. Can you imagine what we as Rochester Community Schools could do with half of our general fund budget? $95 million. What kind of difference that we could make with programming, with HVAC, with food service, all these different things that we talk about as we look at return to learn. But for us, it's $1 million. So there are some challenges that those differences in the funding formula and what that means for districts around us and other districts in the state receiving additional dollars where we've got $1 million on a $190 million budget. Next, let's take a look at per pupil foundation allowance. So this calculation is a little bit cleaner than that Title I calculation. There's all the numbers that we can share with you. In the state, the minimum foundation allowance is $8,111. So every school district or public school, charter academy is entitled to $8,111 per student. The maximum foundation is $8,529. But there are some districts when Prop A was first passed that were able to be held harmless and could continue to receive more funds because they passed an additional millage on their community to receive more than that $8,529 or what's grown to $8,529 per student. So the largest in Oakland County is $12,364 per student. Now for pupil count, it's typically 90% of the fall and 10% of the spring count, at least over the last few years. For this year, there's the new super blend, which is a blend of 75%, which is based on last year's fall 19, 90%, and 10% of spring 19. And 25% is based on 90% of this fall and 10% of the spring 2020 count. Now, pupil accounting has changed that a little bit, right? So before COVID, on count day, if I was present on that Wednesday, I counted in full. If I was absent, the district would work to determine whether or not that was a excused absence or an unexcused absence. And then based on the results of their findings, I either had 10 days to return to all my classes or 30 days to return to all my classes. Because we have to use these two-way interactions, there is no real pupil count day anymore. It's pupil count month. So there's 4 weeks where students have to participate. Now they have to participate once per week, Wednesday to Tuesday, either live in person or through a synchronous platform, the completion of assignment, or the documented interaction between a teacher through email, telephone, or another synchronous platform. Also, that means that students may not count, as one, right? If they miss a week and weren't able to interact with their teacher, maybe they're a 0.75 FTE rather than that full FTE. So with that being said, let's take a look at pupil count. And you'll see some consistency when we look at spring 2019, fall 2019, and spring of 2020, right? A full-time equivalency, or FTE, well, about 15,400 students or greater. You'll see in fall 2020, that changed. Now this fall number, 14,981.05 FT, the audit has been completed, but the data hasn't been certified yet, so there could be some pending FTE changes. They'd be minor because the audit's complete, but it has to be certified, excuse me, before those numbers are official. So the question is, what happened to our students, right? If we had 15,400 and only about 15,000 students under our last count, what happened? So we did a comparison between 1920, the year before the pandemic, and we looked at the summer through count day and compared 1920 to the current year. Now, what we found was that more students, about 250 students more than 1920, enrolled in private schools. We found that more students, about 100, were homeschooled. We did find also that fewer students moved out of the district. So there are fewer students that dropped to go to another district in Oakland County or another district in Michigan, or that even left the state altogether. And maybe somewhat surprisingly, we found that there were fewer secondary drops in students than in previous years. So we lost students at the elementary level, but retained students at a greater rate than we had in the past at the secondary level. Another question mark was kindergarten. There are fewer students enrolled in kindergarten. When we look at our final FTE report, or our audited FTE report, it's not quite final, we had about 1,009. If we look at our projections from Decision Insight, they projected about 1,143 students. Now, it's hard to tell where those students went, right? We've never had a record of those students. For the students that went to private schools or home schools, they were in the district, we have their information, but these students just never showed up. So we're not sure if these students enrolled in kindergarten in a private school or homeschooled. Will they show up next year as first graders? Will they show up next year as kindergarten students? I did see an article recently that said that there were more than 50,000 students that weren't accounted for, right? They kind of didn't show up, or they disappeared, right? About a 3.7% decline in the state. 13,000 per that article were delaying their decision to start kindergarten. 17,000 were homeschooled, but the state doesn't track how many students switch from public to a private school. For us, looking at those numbers, it's about a 3.1% decrease in our total enrollment. Now, there's a possibility, and maybe a strong likelihood even, that that number would have been greater had we not implemented the virtual campus as an option. Right, we have 2,864 students that are currently enrolled in virtual campus programming. So it's hard to say how much worse those numbers would have been without that virtual campus option. Now, I've done a lot of talking before we dive into the budget. Maybe now is a good time to stop and take any questions.
Board member questions or comments?
Just one, and I know we looked over some of this the other day at the committee meeting, and a thought came to me afterward. Are we able to look at the amount of kindergarten students who came to the spring prior kindergarten roundup versus how many enrolled in the fall? Like, could we look at those numbers for those kindergarten numbers at all?
Sure. Those students would have been included if they had registered with the district in those numbers that moved to a private school or were homeschooled,
Okay.
because we would have had a record for them. It's those students that really never showed up that we're having some challenges with what's going to happen, right? Are they going to show up as first graders? Are they going to show up as kindergartners next year? Corey?
And if I could add to that real quick, one of the things that we noticed kind of right at the start of the pandemic is when we would typically hold our in-building kindergarten registration and orientations. And even from those numbers of families that had reached out at that point, inquiring about kindergarten start for their child this past fall, those were lower than the numbers that we've tracked in the past. Now, again, that's not a true apples to apples comparison because we don't have data that shows us how many students or families attend typically in March actually show up on day one in the fall and maintain enrollment in kindergarten that next year. However, we had indications as early as late March and April that our kindergarten enrollment was lower. And when we had buildings communicate, families were still in the early decision process of how to handle the fall for an incoming or first time student during a pandemic.
And what is, what is our process going to be for, I guess, going forward and trying to, and that's always a huge guess that we have. And of course we lean on Decision Insight and some of our advisors to project enrollment. I guess, what is the plan come, budget time this spring for planning for next year? Are we able to, try to track down these students that we don't know where they are?
Yeah, I'll let Matt handle the financial aspect in terms of just communicating out and dealing with connecting with families. We have a plan in place where we'll start at the building level for those that we knew made a choice that was different than RCS this year for whatever the reason, to re-engage those families and just see what their thinking may be for next year. We have already begun communicating and posting just a simple Google form for families that may have an interest in kindergarten or transitional kindergarten for their child in the fall of next year. So we've been collecting information and names, still relying very much on just neighborhood connections in that case, because a lot of those families are not signed up for our school messenger system, and to sign up for that so they can get all of our district communications. Later this week, we'll have our standard welcome to kindergarten class of 2033, which sounds even bizarre to say, but the class of 2033, and here's how you enroll. Here's when our online registration process will begin, because that was new for us last year as well, right? That we were working on it and we were planning for it. We didn't think we would go live K-12, but then the health crisis took place and we needed to do that. So getting that information out to families like we typically would in a similar typical fashion and time frame. And then on March 23rd, and I believe I have that date correct, I don't have it in front of me, but on March 23rd, each of our buildings will be hosting a virtual kindergarten orientation. And that will be communicated to our families later this week as well. So they'll get the general information like they always do, just not in beautiful Stony Creek auditorium. It'll be a voiceover PowerPoint. They'll get dates and times of when they can start expecting building specific information. And another thing that I can share, President Bull, is just our initial engagement from the Google form. We've already captured more families for TK and K that have an interest. Again, they'll have a summer to think about what will be best for their family and for their child. But we already have more people that have registered on that Google form than we did last year that showed up to the initial orientation welcome in the middle of February at Stony Creek last year.
Thanks for that information. Yeah, and I don't want it to seem as though this is all about, I didn't mean to end that question right when I did and make it seem like this is all about the budget and numbers, because these are students. And obviously we know that families made the choices that they did. Everyone has their own reasons and every family has to do what's right for them. very concerned about the students that we don't know where they are, and hopefully we have a way of figuring that out and making sure they're okay at the end of the day.
Yeah, from a budget standpoint, one thing that I did not mention was based on that super blend, we weren't feeling the enrollment change as much financially as if it would have been the normal 90-10 rule, which allowed us to make some different decisions when it came to supporting those students, right? If we were down 400, 500 students, we would have some different staffing levels and make some adjustments to balance that budget. With the unknown, we'll have multiple assumptions and multiple projections as to how we'll move forward for next year.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? All right, so if we can move on to general fund budget revenue. Overall here, you'll see that in total, budget revenue stayed pretty close from where it was with Amendment 1 that was adopted. The biggest shift was local revenue and a swap really between federal revenue and transfers in and other financing sources. So with local revenue to start off, we continued to project a budget that showed our tuition-based programs returning to operation at some point during that November, December timeframe. Now that didn't happen, right? We've been remote and we need to further adjust the local revenue down. Now we based that on the assumption that starting today for elementary programs and March 1st for our secondary programs, that those programs will run at their normal 5-day per week levels, which has led to a reduction of about $800,000 in local revenue. And the programs that I'm talking about are school-age care, pre-K, and enrichment programs. You'll see we've trued up state revenue. We have a pretty close estimate of where that audited number is going to be. We have our state aid status report, so we've trued up those numbers, and it was about $570,000 increase. Now with federal revenue and the transfers in and out, that was mostly a reallocation. So we received $1.8 million for Chromebooks from Oakland County. When we initially budgeted that, we budgeted in federal revenue. What we found out is that really was a transfer from Oakland County, so we needed to budget and record it in the transfers in and other financing sources. So you see the 1.8 increase in transfers in, but you won't see the 1.8 decrease in federal revenue. And that's because we also have some additional grant funding, some carryover money that we don't put in the budget until that carryover's fully certified and we have those amounts. So now that process has been completed, and that typically takes to the end of November to do the final reporting, there was some additional revenue that is why that's not a complete 1.8 offset and 1.8 addition. Next, we'll look at expenditures, and I just want to go over the functional categories. There's some that are very clear, but some that aren't. So basic programs, that's all of our direct instructional costs. Added needs, this is special education. Compensatory education, that's programming like Title I or 31A, additional services that our students received, as well as CT instruction. Now, pupil support includes guidance counseling, psychology, speech pathologists, social workers, and special education teacher consultants. And central support is communication, technology, staff personnel services, and pupil accounting. Other support is mostly made up of athletics. So let's take a look at the general fund budget expenditures. So you see there's a reduction in basic programming, about 1.6, 1.7 million. So we've trued up staffing. With that, we've also, with the budget, we always hold a reserve for open staff positions, assuming that those positions are going to be filled. Now we know with that assumption that we're not going to fill 100% of those positions, but we want to make sure that we budget for them. Now, because there's still a number of open positions, that reserve can be decreased, right? Because we approved that amendment in November, didn't pay out any of those salaries that we had budgeted for, and don't expect to have all of those positions filled until end of February, March at the very soonest. So we've been able to reduce that reserve. You'll see that there is an increase in added needs. And added needs, you'll remember, special education and our grant programs as well as CTE. With this budget, I should take a step back and talk a little bit about staffing, salary, and benefits. Right, November is kind of that estimate of where we think we're going to be. Now that we're in February, when we look at staff, we have a month's worth of data, paychecks, things like that, that we can finish our projection on, right? So in November, we're projecting salaries for the bulk of the year. In February, now we're projecting a much smaller amount. So we're able to refine that projection. With added needs, we trued up salary and benefit costs, as well as added in some of that grant funding that I talked about in the revenue piece. Adult and continuing education increased to almost 300,000. Overall, a small piece of the budget, but for that adult ed program is a huge amount of funding. And that's because due to the pandemic, there was extra grant funds available because they weren't spent in the prior years. So we got a substantial amount of carryover as well as an increase in revenue for this year. Pupil support, there wasn't a real material change there. Instructional staff support, again, truing up salary and benefits. General ed, school administration, business support, operations, maintenance, and security, pupil transportation, not a whole lot of changes there. Central support, an increase of 286,000. That is partially from that reserve that I talked about for positions with basic programs. There were several technology positions that were open at the time. So we, for simplicity, budgeted all in that one line item in basic programs. And now we're distributing it out to the central support line item. Other support, which again is mostly made up of athletics, was a decrease based on actual costs. Community services was a small increase. Building improvement services stayed the same. And then there was an increase in the transfer to Caring Steps. And we'll talk about the Caring Steps budget in just a moment. So the question is, now that we tie revenue and expenditures together, what does that do to fund balance? So looking at fund balance, you'll see that there was an increase in revenue, increase in expenditures as well, but overall about the same result when it comes to the addition of fund balance as the First Amendment, right? 100,000 in November. Now we're projecting $151,000 increase for the general fund. Next, let's look at a little bit of historical data. You'll see that in 2012, our expenditures exceeded revenue by quite a large amount, and that continued that trend until about 2016, when revenues exceeded expenditures. You will see that when it comes to revenue, at least, that it kind of grew at a pretty similar rate throughout these 10 years until we got to 2021, which is a pretty sharp increase. And that's related to all the funds that were provided to respond to COVID-19 in the pandemic. Next, let's take a look at general fund balance. General fund balance is healthy at 20.63%. And then moving on to the food service fund budget. There were some challenges with this budget, right? So typically when we're budgeting for the food service fund, we know there's going to be 100 school days, or 180 school days, excuse me. We know there's going to be 15,000 students. We know that kids are going to be eating in our cafeterias, for most of those 180 days. With the pandemic, we made the decision, we felt it was a moral imperative that we needed to continue to feed our students. And so we did. But we couldn't feed them in cafeterias as we normally would. We had to come up with some meal distribution programs and distribute it at school buildings, but not for students that were attending in school like they would normally pick up a hot lunch or a cold lunch from the cafeteria, which has led to some shifts in revenue, some reductions in costs as well, but the greatest being a reduction in local revenue, $2.3 million compared to the original budget. Now, this is local revenue is all money that comes in from students or, to a much, much smaller degree, teachers that might buy a lunch at school. A lot of this revenue is a la carte items that are sold at the cafeteria that, haven't been sold all year long. So a huge reduction in local revenue, an increase in federal revenue because we've been able to operate under the summer food service program. They actually recently increased the reimbursement rate. So there's some additional funding there. And then because of the new model this year where we distributed food a few times a week or once per week, there's some savings in expenditures, right? Expenditures dropped by almost 1.1 million. And we also had some building improvement projects. You'll remember that we redid the kitchen and cafeterias at 2 of the high schools last summer. Those projects have been finished. We initially budgeted $600,000 for those projects, and in total they came in at about $462,000. So we have a finalized number for those projects. So overall, for the food service fund budget, that is a loss of $764,000. Now, the only good news with this budget is that still leaves a fund balance of $782,000, 29.18% of expenditures. You'll remember for the last several years that we've received a finding for having too much fund balance in our food service account. So fortunately for us and other school districts may not have had that finding and may be in a much worse situation, but for us, we still have a healthy fund balance even after a challenging year so far. Now, this budget is based on the assumption that students have returned full 5 days a week and will continue to stay that way. So this budget will need to be adjusted based on whether or not that 5 day a week model stays in place, or if there's challenges where we have to make some other decisions. But this budget overall, even though with a $760,000 loss, still fund balance remains strong. Next, looking at Caring Steps. Again, the pandemic has impacted this budget as well. Local revenue is down about $460,000. Much like you saw with the food service budget, that there has been some other revenue sources that have been offered. State revenue is some child care relief grants that Brittany and Courtney and their teams were able to apply for it and get for us. Almost $100,000 there. There's the $298,000 transfer that we talked about with the general fund. And then because the number of students being served at Caring Steps has been reduced to about 51 FTE, there's also some savings in the budget for staffing, right? Basic programs, you'll see a decrease of about 130,000. You'll see instructional staff support, operations and maintenance, some small increases there, a small decrease in central support, and then community services, a decrease of about 81,000. So what that means is the general fund has to support it with 298,000. Now we've been working, Corey and I have been working with Brittany and Courtney to look for any operational efficiencies that we can. But we know that staffing and students are going to be a key to bringing this budget closer to profitability or to break even. Right. One of the challenges with Caring Steps, as well as, we've saw it with custodians, bus drivers across the district, paras, teachers as well, that there's people that are concerned about the pandemic enough that they've decided not to work. So trying to get people to staff Caring Steps so that we can remove students from the wait list and get them into the center, which helps the budget, right? It helps the students because they're receiving the services, but it also helps the budget because we're bringing in that tuition revenue. That's a key. Now, I'm hopeful, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, that with the the vaccine being distributed to Rochester employees that, as the world starts to slowly move out of the pandemic and vaccines are being distributed, that staff will feel more comfortable, or potential staff will feel more comfortable to return to work, and that we can staff Caring Steps at the level that we could currently, based on the wait lists that we have at those buildings or at that building. Now, we still need more students, right? The wait list isn't enough to get us there. So we do need more students, but hopeful as well that, with the vaccines and much like our staff, that families will feel more comfortable bringing students to Caring Steps. But that's not a certainty at this point. We don't know what the new normal will be once we're through the pandemic. So there's some question marks here as well. Corey, is there anything that you'd like to add to Caring Steps?
Just one kind of small caveat, and with regards to staffing in particular, and not just the challenges that childcare facilities, traditionally face, but that have been magnified through the pandemic. We have still staffed in a way to help mitigate risk. In finding that balance of not just making sure that we're following licensing guidelines within a childcare facility, but also supplying enough staff so that we're not combining classrooms, so that we're trying to maintain even cohorting in the child care center as much as feasibly possible within that, where, prior to the pandemic, if there was, 2 toddlers in one room and 2 toddlers in another room, you could combine those classrooms and maybe have more flexibility with how much staff you have on site for that particular day or even with that week, depending on a family's schedule. We haven't chosen to do that this year based on the pandemic and what we heard from licensing way back in April when we reopened the facility as an opportunity for our frontline workers and essential workers to have childcare. So we've maintained some level of staffing that doesn't necessarily fit the amount of FTE that we currently have. However, that is due to a response to the pandemic and hoping to mitigate as much risk as possible.
All right, then finally, we'll look at future budget impacts, and we've talked about this throughout the presentation. But the state economy and the foundation allowance, right? That's a huge question mark. We understand that from last year, that without the federal stimulus, there would have been a proration. Luckily, there was some foresight from our leadership team that made some decisions. But again, it's possible for us to end our fiscal year on June 30th and then not receive a reduction until later in the year in July or August, where there's nothing that we can do to adjust the budget based on those changes in revenue. The state school aid fund budget, that's tied directly to the economy and taxes, retirement changes, health insurance. Those are factors that we are always up against and that are typically increasing. Actual student enrollment, including the virtual campus, staffing levels, the outcome of ongoing operational efficiencies, contract negotiations. One thing that has been a challenge with this year is that we're just trying to get through it in some ways, and that to do that, we've agreed to some short-term 1-year extensions in contract negotiations. Typically, we don't like to negotiate contracts with 4 groups in the year. We try to kind of keep that more balanced, but looking into the next school year, we have 4 contracts that we'll need to negotiate. And then, as I mentioned with Caring Steps, the COVID-19 pandemic, how quickly vaccines are distributed, how quickly people become more comfortable with the new environment, and the changing status of the pandemic will have a huge impact on what happens with the district's general fund, the food service fund, and the Caring Steps fund. And finally, we are committed to providing a spending plan that falls within the available resources. And at this point, Madam President, I'd be happy to answer any questions on the numbers.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. Questions from the board or comments? Barb.
So Matt, you mentioned the revenue estimating conference. The next one will be in May, correct? So that could hopefully shed a little light on what the three entities, the executive branch and the two legislative bodies, will come up with in terms of where they'll have to hash out a mutual agreement in terms of moving forward on the budget, correct?
Yeah, that'll help shed some light on what money is available to allocate. Now, a question mark is, we talked about federal stimulus, right? There may be another federal stimulus. If there is, that could impact how much money is available. But yeah, we'll have a better idea of where the budgets will be in May. But really, it's state legislatures and the governor to come to an agreement on how those funds are allocated.
So my question is, as a community, as a board, as a community of parents who have kids in public education, and I'm all about advocating for the kids in our district and kids in public education in general. I'm guessing that to get us to a point where they have come to a mutual agreement through this revenue consensus conference, and really trying to speak up with our legislators in the executive branch, encouraging them to come to a consensus and pass that budget as quickly as they can, correct? Because correct me if I'm wrong, last year, well, pre-COVID, the idea was that they pass something before we have to be legally required to by June 30th, correct? Or July 1st, I guess.
Yeah, there was an agreement, or I'm not sure if it was a law or if it was, maybe they just changed it. But there was an agreement amongst the legislature that they would pass a budget by June 30th so that schools whose fiscal year starts July 1st could have an idea what the funding looked like when we approve that budget that by law has to be approved by June 30. Now, with the pandemic, everybody agreed that, we just didn't have enough information, at least in the legislature, to do that. And they threw out that June 30th date, and we didn't get that budget till September 30th. But ideally, the more time that we have to plan, and if we have a state budget, we'll have a better idea of what our funding looks like and how best to use those funds to support our students.
Well, I know that right now there's a discrepancy between the executive branch and at least the House and the Senate. They haven't come forward with a budget, which you mentioned, but there is, some federal dollars that could potentially be coming back to our state that that's kind of up for grabs, so to speak. So I would really, I guess, recommend especially our parent community to reach out to our elected officials and let them know how important it is that this budget get passed, so that as we move into the fall, we have an idea of what that expectation is and how that could impact our budget.
That's a good point. Thanks. Any other questions or comments from the board? So just to let our community know, we did also review the budget and the budget amendment in detail in committee meetings last week. Thanks for walking us through, Matt. And we will be voting on this at our meeting on the 8th. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
So our meeting on March 8th is when we will be voting, when we'll be actually taking a vote on this. So we'll review again at that time, I'm sure, and there'll be new information then. All right. So Debbie, did you have anything about this one?
No, I have the next part though. And I guess the one thing that when we were reviewing this process through committees and also looking at it this morning, we're very grateful to the board, to Matt and Dana and the business department for the financial leadership that they have guided this organization through the pandemic this year. So we thank the board for fiscally ensuring that we have a fund balance.
Thank you. If we can just real quick, so we had a community member who had tried to speak at the start of the meeting. I'm going to see if I can, yep, it looks like it works now. Andrew Weaver, if you want to speak now, looks like you're unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, so my name is Andrew Weaver. I have two sons at Brooklands. So I've chosen to speak again because obviously the board continues to ignore the facts in the ground. Here we sit in the first day that our younger kids went back to full-time school, and we're just going to already start talking about next year and not address any of the issues that so we face. And again, part of it, said, Corey just mentioned that we are operating off of feedback from a year ago, April. That was just said, and not a single board member thought to question that we are working off of feedback from April of a year ago. It's got to the point that it's absurd. And then to hear Barb talk about, yeah, let's start lobbying the government for next year. The role is the district now, facing the issues that face us today. And with that being said, it's clear that the district thinks they've done everything right. They keep patting themselves on the back. Our board is supposed to be the check and balance. They gave up that responsibility in October of last year when they gave Shaner a blank check to do whatever he wanted, which was wrong. It's your responsibility to be that check and balance. We currently have Kevin, who was selected to the board, Barb, who was selected to the board, Andrea, who was appointed to the board. So yes, when we talk about elected officials making our decisions, we have many on our board that are not elected officials. So with that said, and again, actually, I'm gonna address one other thing. We have Google Forms now out soliciting kindergartners and TK for next year. That's great, because it's been 262 days since the district asked parents for their feedback. Something parents have been asking to be done. Something we were told, hey, and it's hard to do it around the holidays, but we'll look into it. And again, the board and the district just expect parents to ignore it and just let it go. So with that being said, I will be filing recall petitions on the 3 board members I listed, including Michelle, because they're the ones that are eligible, with the county this week. The other 3 that were just recently elected, we will file recall petitions against them as soon as they are eligible. We need to have elected officials that actually represent the community, that actually do their responsibility and hold the district accountable. No longer can we continue to give a pass to people that are allowing our children to suffer, as we just think we can move on to next year and everyone's going to continue to put their position where they want to be career-wise, where they want to be for their political career. So we'll find out. We'll hold our own survey. We'll see if we can get the signatures needed to recall the 4 board members that are eligible. And then we'll have an election and we'll see where the community stands. Because again, the district can't even do a simple survey, so we'll hold our own. And it will be the voice of the people speaking.
Thank you. Before we go on, just to clarify a point of misinformation, all 7 of us have been elected at one time or another. So we will continue with our meeting, and I will hand this over to our Deputy Superintendent, Debbie Fragamenti. The next item on our agenda is, under our work session agenda, is Return to Learn update, secondary specifically.
Thank you, Madam President. Good evening to our board members and our community members this evening. This evening, my colleagues and I would like to not only give some timelines and updates as we build our framework for our Return to Learn, but this evening we'll be talking about the secondary schedule, along with quarantining of students moving forward. We'll continue to discuss safety protocols, and we'll be discussing as well the importance of the cafeteria model service. So we've invited one of our directors of our service program to talk a little bit about the requirements from the federal government to ensure that we provide meals for all families. So it's a comprehensive overview of what is happening today and moving forward. So we thank you for your attention, and we're pleased to get started. So if we could start the slides, please. Again, each time we share the timeline, the first 2 slides start from June 2nd. And we go all the way through the different rentals, the different components that we have put into place. This has been very helpful for our committee work. It's also been helpful for our community to look at the timeline of when technology has been deployed, the different learning plans that have been approved each month that will continue to do so. The timeline here with the photos are extra special. I believe that we had some of these on February 8th. At that time, our high school students returned to in-person learning by cohort using a hybrid approach, and middle and high school athletics resumed. The other component of February 8th was the approval of the return to COVID plan. February 22nd is going into my gratitude journal. Elementary grades pre-K5 and ECSE return to in-person learning full-time. As I mentioned to some colleagues prior to the meeting, to see our students get off the buses and line up and go into those buildings today, very happy, knowing exactly what to do with their masks on. It was a wonderful day and a great accomplishment moving forward today. Next slide, please. This is a slide that we utilize. We continue to work closely with the Oakland County Health Department. We study with medical experts. And this right here is a summary from Oakland County. As you will note, as of February 19th, currently in Oakland County, we have 72 cases. This form has been utilized since the fall. And since that time in January, this framework of a matrix that was designed has become obsolete. But we thought it was important to note that as of 2/19/21, with 72 cases, if that matrix were in place, we would still be in level orange. I think that's important to say because we're not moving away from watching the numbers, but we are working with the current guidance and continuing to monitor that every day. Next slide, please. This again is a weekly report, and our numbers and the benchmarks here are all going down. Hospitalizations are stabilized, and the county continues to see a decrease in the number of cases each week. The number of tests are decreasing, and the percentage of cases of hospitalized remain very stable. Healthcare capacity remains stable as well. All important components that we need to pay attention to and continue to do so as our children are in school. The Michigan Department of Health and Human Services and the OCHD school guidance at a glance. This is the timeline once again, beginning June 30th when we began our roadmap. If you look at the last slide down on February 8th, that was where the current order to allow contact sports did resume February 8th, and safety protocols have been in place for practices and competitions. We are working in collaboration and thank our building administrators, our athletic directors, our parents, and ultimately, most importantly, our athletes who are returning to those athletic components that are so important to them. And they're making great strides to follow strict mitigations. Under RCS plans, our preparedness plan was revised January 20th, and the learning plan is what the board approves each month, and we'll be bringing it back in March as well. Are there any questions? So with that, then I will turn this with my colleagues over to the return to in-person learning and give the community an update on our action steps, on the works of our committee, and of our deliberate intent to provide high quality instruction for our students moving forward. And I will turn this over to Ms. Concetta Lewis to talk about the return to in-person learning.
Hi, good evening. You're welcome. Thank you, Mrs. Fergamini. Good evening, everyone. We are excited, as Debbie mentioned today, we welcomed back our elementary students and pre-K through grade 5. We also welcomed back our ECSE students today for 4 days with an increased amount of time for those students as well. So we are looking forward to it. And as Debbie said, they're the cutest little things with their mask on, and they're excited to be back, and we're excited to have them back. So we are really looking forward to moving forward. On March 1st, we will welcome back all of our secondary students and our students at the Adult Transition Programs and Services campus for full-time in-person learning. At the secondary level, the schedules will look a little different, just to continue so that we can have mitigation procedures in place for them. One of the things that's really great from the special ed perspective, as we move back into full-time in-person learning, our categorical program classrooms are returning back in sync with their level, so they'll continue to be able to engage with their peers. But I'll say this, probably the best thing from the adult perspective is that we no longer need contingency learning plans. So once our students are back full-time, staff members and parents don't have to go through that CLP process. And so I think staff will be very excited about that. That's probably number 2 after seeing their students back in the classroom. Dave Murphy will share a little bit more about what that secondary schedule will look like as we move forward.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me. We're pretty proud to welcome back our high schoolers and our middle schoolers next Monday to start full in-person learning. It's been a result of a lot of work, a lot of committee discussions. We've had a lot of collaboration with our teachers on how this day should look from a number of different aspects. It's definitely been an iterative process and will continue to be so. In the end, the goal is to maximize instructional time for our students while also ensuring equity and feeding our students during the school day, while also continuing to mitigate to the best of our ability to keep it to be a safe environment. So as you can see, and as was communicated in the community message on Friday, and to keep the block scheduling model with 3 2-hour blocks throughout the course of each day, with the hours 1 through 3 on Monday and Thursday, the hours 4 through 6 on Tuesdays and Fridays, and then Wednesday we'll operate in a rotational model to keep that balance. When you add that up, you get to about 360 instructional minutes per day, slightly more than your average day actually in a 6-hour model. And according to at least the districts we've compared to at this point in the Tri-County area, yet to find one that will be offering that level of instructional face-to-face learning this early. In order to do so and still mitigate at lunchtime, there will be 4 lunch periods. And that's it for that slide. You can go to the next one. So in order to support students that are in quarantine, I'm going to talk through the process here. First, there'll be individual arrangements made to support each student. So it'll be different depending on the situation, obviously, if we're talking a few students or a lot. But there'll be a tiered level of support. So it'll start with the classroom. The most important thing is to maintain the personal relationship that the teachers have with that individual student. So that teacher will maintain contact throughout and also will provide the resources, links, and schoolwork that the student may be missing depending on their length of quarantine time. Also at the building level, there'll be staff level support set up and communicated to that student. And at the district level as well, there'll be some sessions set up directly for core areas. So if the student needs, maybe they're an advanced math student and that check-in isn't enough at the building level, there'll be some time devoted where they can access a highly trained math teacher throughout the course of the week for some additional assistance there. So this slide just kind of goes through the responsibilities, and these reflect what were communicated last Friday as well. I want to give you just an example of, let's say, a student or two in a class have to be quarantined. What might they face or what the process might be? So if they're asked to stay home, but they're healthy, right? It's not a fault of their own. It's through contact tracing or some other issue that may have arisen. At first, they will continue the communication with their teacher. They'll communicate what schoolwork might be missed. And they'll do that through phone call, email, Google Classroom, whatever that professional judges is the best way to do so. The student then will also be given the contacts and the links for daily up to an hour sessions where they can check in at their building level. So that student will be able to access that just for some general support, some general question and answer. And then again, as mentioned before, they will also be given the schedule and can sign up for throughout the course of their quarantine times where they can get more individualized support based on that the core subject area they may be missing. And as always, the most important thing in any of this is that relationship which has been built and cultivated throughout the school year by our staff with our students. We trust our professionals to maintain that connection. They know what our students need, and each situation will present unique circumstances, which we definitely trust them to handle in the best way, in the best interest of each student. I think that's it for that slide. I'm going to pass it over to Tracy Heiser. Welcome, Tracy.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Thank you for inviting me to present to you this evening. So I just wanted to give a quick little food service recap. As we know, the USDA are allowing all meals to be free of charge for breakfast and lunch. Originally, this was in effect through December, the end of December, but it has been extended through the end of June 2021. The cost of the meals are reimbursed through the summer food service program this year. Some of the requirements that we continue to follow, all self-service items, salad bars, bulk condiments will be eliminated. Silverware, things that the kids would touch with their hands will all be handed to the students in the service line. All cafeteria staff practice social distancing and wear their required PPE. Plexiglass barriers are in place on all of the service lines and at the cashier stands. And social distance signage has been installed at all the buildings. We use a tally sheet used for meal counting. So currently we will not be using the point of sale service at this time. And we continue to comply with rules and regulations with the state and local fire safety, Federal Food and Drug Administration, Michigan Department of Education, United States Department of Agriculture, Oakland County Health Department, and others. And next, Matt is going to talk about food service goals.
Thank you, Mrs. Heiser. As Tracy mentioned, that there are several areas of rules and regulations that we have to abide by, both at the federal, state, and local level. Tracy went through and mentioned some of the requirements that have changed due to the pandemic, but a lot of those other rules and regulations haven't changed. But when we look at the goal of our food service program, right, we've said in the past that we believe feeding students is a moral imperative. We need to feed students in school when they're there during the school day. We want to serve them hot and cold options that are high quality and nutritious. We also want to offer a la carte options. We know that service is very popular, especially at our secondary buildings. We want to maintain the highest level of food safety and sanitation. We want to enable physical distancing to the greatest extent possible, as well as provide adequate supervision and facilitate socialization of our students outside the classrooms. So as we've designed a program or a model to try to meet all of these goals, as well as fall in line with all the requirements that Tracy went through. Now, one thing that we did, we had Chartwells. They are a national company, right? Chartwells is a division of Compass Group. And by the way, Compass Group was recently named the #1 food management company by Food Management Magazine. But a little bit about Compass Group, they have 665 districts that they work with across the country. There's 16,000 plus Chartwells employees, and they serve 2 million meals every single day. So we took a look at their operator playbook which suggested 6 different service models that could be available to the district. And Tracy's going to take us through those 6 models.
Yeah, so Matt said Chartwell's did develop 6 different service models to bring to districts, knowing that everyone's service model was going to be different. So this was a group of regional chefs, dietitians, directors of dining services, district managers, all came together to come up with different plans for districts to look at, knowing that they were going to have different service models. So I just wanted to kind of touch on a few of the models. Of course, every model has its advantages and disadvantages, and I think it's just a matter of looking at what your district is looking at for a service model and trying to accommodate within those limits. So the first one is off the bus. So this is where students would arrive to school and they would be handed a meal when they enter the building, get off the bus and then enter the building, and they would go directly to their classroom to eat those meals. That one is more for if you're offering more of a split schedule and things like that. It would be needed for increased staff to hand out the meals, and of course, children eating in the classroom. So you would have more custodial, needing to clean up after that, and then of course eating in the classroom. Take home meals. This is more for skip day scheduling. Students would be sent home with meal kits. I kind of think about the take home meals very similar to what we're doing now, but with curbside. So we're allowing students or parents to come and pick up meals for extended amount of time when children are in school. But the take home meals is more, students would be sent home with meal kits. Ship to home. This is really an option when the other models really don't work within the platform. And then the hallway and the common area. This again is one where you would service the students in the hallway. So you would need increased staffing. You would have to purchase extra mobile equipment to keep food hot and cold. You would, of course, need extra custodial staff, food service staff to be able to hand out the meals, and with counting and claiming. The next model is classroom delivery. So this is where meals would be taken to each classroom and distributed in the classroom to the students. So this is actually the costliest model that was presented. And the reason this is the purchase of the extra equipment to actually transport meals to the classroom that hold the meals hot and cold for a duration of time. Also, the teachers would have to monitor children eating in the classroom. They would be responsible for doing a checkoff system, roster system showing which students eat every day. And then, of course, you would have to have extra food service staff to deliver these meals, and custodial to come in and clean up after each lunch service in the classroom. And then food service staff to go down and get the equipment, bring it back, clean it, and get ready for the next day. And the next one, of course, is the cafeteria, which allows for the preparation of the food in the school kitchen and served to the students in the service line. So we're going to touch a little bit more on classroom delivery. So classroom delivery has its challenges. So the biggest one is food safety. So time, temperature control, making sure that your hot food is held at 140 degrees or higher, and your cold food is held 40 degrees or lower. It comes with a lot of extra equipment costs to purchase hot holding and cold holding units that would have to be, one unit would have to be purchased for each classroom. There is a lead time, of course, to buy this equipment. there's an increased cost for each one of these units. And then, of course, you need additional approval from the MVE before you purchase these units. Staffing, again, I touched base on, you would have to have someone, extra staffing, food service staff to deliver to each one of the classrooms, pick up the food service equipment after each meal service. And again, this puts an extra task on the teachers, where the teachers would be responsible for recording the students who eat, sending in a pre-ordered sheet so that we're not making more food than students are going to consume on that day. And then during lunch service, they would have to be in the classroom to supervise each student during the duration of the lunch period or breakfast. Again, this is an extra labor for custodians, having to clean and sanitize the classroom after each lunch service, and then removing trash after each meal service. So the next one is the cafeteria meal service, which is the service model that we would like to go through with Rochester Community Schools. Food safety, of course, is our #1 priority, and this allows us to really monitor temperatures more consistently on the service line. It's the service model that's most familiar to students. They enjoy coming to the cafeteria. It's their time to socialize. They're used to the service lines, seeing our staff every day. And I think our ladies like that too. It's the best opportunity for the highest meal quality in the variety in the service line. This allows us to offer hot and cold options, a variety of hot and cold options daily. There's a short time between when we prepare the food and when the food goes out on the service lines for the students to come through. So that increases the quality of the food too, instead of sitting, in a hot holding unit for an extended period of time. And this is the only model that really enables future a la carte service, which is what we would like to move to within the next few weeks once students come back to school every day. This facilitates record keeping. The food service staff would be responsible for maintaining these records and using the tally sheets as the students come through the line to check off the meals. And supervision and observation, of course, students are in an area that can be more easily supervised and behaviors more easily observed.
So understanding that that's the model that we want to use, the cafeteria model. Also, Mrs. Heiser talked about the requirements that we have to follow. I spoke about the goals that we have for our food service program. There's still some additional considerations that we haven't talked about, right? We have a finite amount of space that we can use. There's a certain number of tables. There's a certain number of table types, right? So it's a little bit of a puzzle. We have a certain square footage of available space in our building. And then we have different levels of enrollment at each of our buildings, which means different sizes of lunches and different square feet in the cafeteria. So this is a bit of a puzzle that we've been working through. We've been working in collaboration with our instructional staff, our facilities, our food service staff. I think that's one of the great things, but at the same time, one of the challenges, right? It seems like a really easy decision if you don't have to take into effect food service regulations and rules or instruction. I can make a decision on where we're going to have students sit for lunch without having to take into account those factors. So for elementary, students are going to remain cohorted. They're placed in every other seat with no students sitting directly across from another. You'll remember that at the elementary level, students are cohorted. They're with the same group of students throughout the day, and they're going to continue to be with those students in the cafeteria. And all elementary schools have been equipped with enough 12-foot cafeteria tables to accommodate this arrangement. At the secondary level, the recommendation is to include 6 students per 12-foot table, which is a 4-foot distance between seats center to center. With this configuration so far, we've been able to create a model that supports all of our school buildings except for Hart and Van Hoosen. We continue to work with those leadership teams, Mr. Mooney, Mr. Fairchild, and Mrs. Roberts and Mr. Benyon at their buildings to look for ways to accommodate students for lunch in their buildings. And what one of those challenges are as we collaborate is, if I want to use a space that seems really easy to me, well, maybe there's a food service regulation or something like Tracy talked about with equipment that we have to have that we can maintain food safety. Or maybe there's an instructional reason. A class needs to be in there because they need to be distant. So we continue to work with our teams to analyze options for Hart and Van Hoosen. We hope to have some more information shortly, but we continue to work through that. We have some additional conversations scheduled with them tomorrow and hope to get some information out as quickly as possible. A little bit on distribution and cleaning. Right now, it's a touchless food distribution and pre-packaged meals will be provided. Cafeterias and other areas used for meal services will be cleaned as appropriate between lunch periods. And high school seniors can go off campus for lunch. That's the model as it stands right now. Next, we'll have a update on inclement weather from Mrs. Fragomeni.
Yes, and everyone who knows Mrs. Fragomeni knows this would be a slide that I would be very honored to do. And that is, was in our communication on Friday, inclement weather update. Our district will always err on the side of caution to keep our students and staff safe, which may include canceling school and school-related activities during treacherous weather conditions. If a snow day is called in the event between now and the spring, school would be canceled for everyone, and that would include our students who attend the RCS virtual campus. And we wanted to make sure we put that information out. We are hoping for only brighter days forward, but we wanted to make sure that the community understood that a snow day would be called, a robocall would be submitted, and we also use our local media and our Facebook and our website to update any cancellations of school. And the next slide is this.
That's me.
Mr. Murphy, thank you.
Hello again. So pretty proud moment over the weekend. We had our first round of staff provided vaccinations and collaboration, and a huge thank you to Ascension Providence who worked with us on this. We had slightly over 300 staff members from all levels and all work groups represented over the weekend, and they will get their second dose in about a month. So March 20th and 21st, a month from the first dose. So these were the group of people we talked about a few weeks ago who weren't in the queue yet. These were folks that were interested, that were frustrated that they couldn't get an appointment, that were trying, and that jumped on the opportunity once provided to get their vaccination. And we heard lots of stories of people that were very thankful to be a part of that process. With the initial survey data and extrapolating that out to our whole work group population and then adding these 300 staff members, we are roughly at 90% of our staff that is in the process somehow, has either received their first shot, has an appointment for their first vaccination, or and many have received now both doses of vaccination. So, and to be honest, most of the other 10% are just folks that medically cannot, or for some reason or another had a conflict or were sick themselves and had to postpone that. So it was a proud day, and hopefully it can speed up this return and make it last to full person learning.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. I just want to draw quick attention. We don't have to spend too much time here, as it was included in our communication to families on Friday, but just that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has updated domestic and international travel guidance. And we've just encouraged families to familiarize themselves with what that guidance does state. And as always, regardless if you're traveling or not, our community has stepped up, as our staff has stepped up and our students have stepped up to continue mitigating in the community as well as much as possible. So again, if you get the opportunity, you can draw back on the communication that we sent Friday, and also when this presentation is shared or on our district's website, and familiarize yourself with the following resources related to domestic and international travel with the updated guidance. And I believe I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Kinsetta Lewis again to talk about some safety protocols.
Yes, so as we come back, and as we've been doing, our top priority remains safety for students and staff. So we have personal protective equipment of all sorts available for staff members, especially for staff in my department. There are various types of situations that they may find themselves in. So we have clear masks that are available for staff and students. So we have student size as well as adult size. We have what we call humanity shields, where again, staff can put on, and we have them both for adults and for students. They can put those on, and the student, if they have difficulty hearing, can read the staff member's lips and vice versa. So we have hospital disposable gowns. Many of our staff members on my team often deal with students who might need some assistance with toileting or other functions. And so staff members are protected to be able to do that. And so I've also continued to communicate with building principals as well as staff members to say, if you find yourself in a situation where maybe there's something that we didn't think of that you needed initially, let us know and we will get that for you and have it at your building. So I'm really appreciative of how our facilities department has worked with us in this partnership. We make that call, I email Micaiah, and we make it happen. And so I'm really excited about that. We will continue with those basic things such as hand washing. Again, you heard us talk about the spacing and the movement for places like the cafeteria, just ensuring that as students are moving about the building, they are spaced appropriately. Again, we've enhanced our cleaning protocols, continue to monitor our ventilation systems and our water management processes. So again, this is one of our top priorities on a regular basis, so we will continue to do that. You can go ahead to the next slide. And again, this one is just our calendar updates. We talked about today was a big day for us in Rochester Community Schools, welcoming everyone back. February 26th, Friday, is the end of the semester, end of the trimester. And it's a half day for TK through 5th grade students. And it's a shortened day for cohort B secondary students who are in person, and they will be dismissed at approximately 10:30, just so that we can make sure that we can get everybody picked up and dropped off in a timely fashion with our transportation department. And cohort A will continue their remote learning as normally scheduled for the afternoon. We talked about March 1st, all of our secondary students and our students in our adult transition programs and services will be coming back. And I just, I'm gonna put this shameless plug out there that we will be opening our jitters back up pretty soon in the next few weeks. So if you are at the admin building, once we open jitters back up, we would love to have you come out and support our students. March 19th is the end of the 3rd quarter, and it's a half day for 6th grade through 12th grade students, as well as our post-high students. And then March 27th through April 4th, I know that our students will be really excited about this. This is our spring break for Rochester Community Schools. And then I have one more shameless plug that I'll make while I'm here. And if, this is, no one can kick me under the table because we're virtual. So I'm gonna go with it. I talked a little bit earlier about IEPs and not needing contingency learning plans. And I just want to clarify that we don't need contingency learning plans because we are reverting back to the IEPs that were written based on what our students' needs are. And so now we are able to fully implement those IEPs as written. And that is why we are excited, because using those CLPs allowed us to maintain the integrity of our students' IEPs without making any changes, so that when we come back to in-person instruction, we can continue with that IEP, and teams will also look, and if there are adjustments that need to be made because we have new data on what our students need, we will do that as well to make adjustments to those IEPs to reflect the current support that students need where we are. And that is it. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Heitch and Mrs. Fragamini.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. And, you know, as we've hit on a few times tonight, that, you know, seeing our fully in-person model take shape today at the elementary level, TK through 5, and special programming of elementary age students certainly brought a smile to not only our faces when we were able to visit classrooms and say hello, but the joy that we saw on our students' face and also our staff's face, who have been a huge part and have been a major part in our ability to collaborate and understand how to do this and understand how to mitigate while promoting a maximization of instructional time. We have to continue, and we will continue to monitor and evaluate procedures to mitigate risk. As Mr. Murphy said earlier, this is an iterative process and will remain an iterative process. And we remain committed to following guidance from the CDC, MD, HHS, and OCHD. And I should add, we remain committed to understanding what that guidance says as well, because it does change through no fault of anybody's, but it's our job to understand that and adapt and be flexible with it. Mrs. Fragamini?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Heisch. I just would like to bring this presentation to a close and reiterate that gratitude indeed fills our hearts. Thank you so very much. Our numerous task force committee members, our subcommittees have worked tirelessly. Our groups of stakeholders bringing information forward has been all very, very helpful in making thoughtful decisions moving forward. We appreciate our thought partners. A big shout out to our students. Talk about resilient, shining lights, and certainly a reflection of our compelling why every day. Our teaching staff, our administrators, our support staff, and our families. A special thank you for your trust. A special thank you for collaborating with us and working through these opportunities to keep your children safe and our staff safe as well. A thank you to our community partners, and we are very proud. We would like to do one more shout out to Ascension Providence Rochester Hospital, who provided the opportunity for those staff members who interact with children to have that opportunity to have their vaccine before we began this journey today. We're just very pleased with the community's support. And with that, we would just like to say thank you for listening to our presentation. More communication will be coming forward. Each Friday, we have made a commitment to ensure that the community has the most updated information. They can expect to see that again on Friday, especially with the work that we're working tirelessly on with our secondary return to learn. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. And it makes sense for me to follow that with a big thank you to you, because you have just done a really amazing job leading this team. Your Friday updates have been very helpful, and appreciate all that you do.
Thank you.
And so I guess we'll open it up to discussion and questions from the board. And I wanted to start by saying I very much appreciate, Tracy, the presentation related to the models of food service. And I wanted to mention that some board members, we had questions about lunches and the lunchroom process. And so we asked some questions, and I think that Tracy's presentation was in direct response to that, explaining some of the options that were looked at and what went into them, and sort of the reason why the model was chosen that was chosen. And that makes a lot of sense to me, and I really appreciate hearing that. Board member questions or comments? Michelle.
So I am looking forward to having all of our students back in. But as we talked about, I mean, one of my biggest concerns is during the lunch period and the spacing that we're able to do. And I just wondered if someone could talk about, and I know Tracy touched on a lot of the choices, but some form of combination where students would pick up their meals, so you would still have the cafeteria format, but then students would potentially go to classrooms so that there would be fewer maybe in the lunchroom and more in classrooms or in other parts of the building to be able to spread out further. And as far as supervision, I mean, we've heard from parents who are interested in coming in, you know, what were the drawbacks to being able to do something along those lines to help spread these kids out?
Yeah, so, you know, Mrs. Heiser would be the expert on that, but, you know, we touched on a few things that makes that challenging with that classroom delivery model, right? We need to purchase equipment to support that so that we can maintain food safety, right? Because
but Matt, I guess I'm saying if you are picking your food up in the cafeteria, the students are going to the cafeteria and then taking it someplace, that would eliminate that portion of it.
Yeah, I mean, it could. You know, some of the other issues that we've talked about is how do we provide supervision and observation, right? We'll provide some socialization, but you don't get to sit with your friends at lunch if you're eating in the classroom. Parent volunteers may help to staff those classrooms, but we would have to make sure that we had parent volunteers that could staff all those classrooms every single day, you know, 5 days a week. And logistically, someone's going to have to plan for that in each building. We're going to have to make sure that those parent volunteers are fingerprinted and understand district policies and district regulations. As Tracy mentioned, right now, you know, under that classroom model, that teachers would have to do some of that work. Custodians would have to do some of that work. You know, parents would need to understand, you know, what their role would be if there was you know, a disciplinary issue, if there was a question from a student. You know, do we pull an administrator from a cafeteria to a classroom to take care of that? Tracy, do you have anything to add on the food
I think
section?
that was the biggest thing that we were talking about is having someone supervise those children, the children in the classroom, and making sure, you know, then of course the extra staff for custodial to have to come in and clean in between each lunchroom and take the garbage out and those kinds of things. I think that was the biggest thing, like you said, having someone every single day assigned to that classroom, because that's the teacher's time. That would be their lunch period.
We also had some discussion about being able to use like bleachers and gyms and things like that. So we're still working on all of that to try and spread people out as much as we can.
So, but Michelle, were you thinking your question was more directed at a K-5 scenario versus a secondary?
No, really it was for all of it, because we're still talking less than 4 feet anywhere in any building. So that's just one of my concerns, you know, and at the secondary level, I didn't know if we had considered allowing juniors to go off campus or something like that as well to limit the number of students who might be there during a lunchtime to help, you know, have a lower density as well.
We did have that conversation, Michelle, and there were a couple reflections on that piece that allowing more students off campus is certainly promoting opportunities for exposure and making contact tracing quite challenging. And the other piece is too, when we do have these inclement days and we are in school, we do close campuses for lunch for student safety. And so the decision was we need to plan as if all our students are going to be having lunch with us and plan that in the event that we would have to stay in person. But we felt for the safety of our students, and the quarantines that have been required, it would be best to limit the number of students who go off campus, and our seniors have always been that population that have had that opportunity to do that.
I had a couple other questions as far as at one point, Matt, I think it was you, but I can't remember, who talked about CDC guidelines for when you travel domestically or internationally. Are we implementing in RCS some type of 14-day quarantine if you do travel during that spring break or any other time, or were those just guidelines for what the CDC was saying?
Yeah, Michelle, I think that was Corey's slide. Corey, you want to handle that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Discussions right now, Michelle, have been focused on sharing the information, and from a guidance and guidelines standpoint. There's a few reasons for that. Obviously, as we will never know unless we're told specifically. So we may be, for lack of a better term, we may be the travel police with one family and not the other, because it wouldn't be a situation where it's requirement to be a very hard thing to manage. And again, it coming from the lens of education, again, as we have with other mitigation factors of, here's, not to bring it to a kindergarten level, but teaching kindergartners not just to wash your hands this year, but why washing your hands is important and how to properly do it. So again, not to sound condescending with adults reading travel guidelines, but really promoting it through the lens of education. And here's the information we've been given, as opposed to putting ourselves in a position of the travel gatekeepers and what each family is responsible for, depending on what they do. If a family doesn't make that choice, that they feel it's appropriate, important, and they're communicating with that particular building of what their plans may be. Obviously, we would support that family, and we'd go into our process for how we would maintain connection and maintain academic pacing for a student who was in quarantine due to a travel situation that a particular family was in.
I appreciate that. I also wondered on, and I apologize, I can't remember, Corey, if it was you or someone else who was talking about the process for the secondary students if they were in quarantine and how they were going to interact with their teacher. And it sounded like there were some links that they would be receiving so that they could touch base with, I think I'm understanding, with teachers in that subject area. Is that correct?
Yep, that was Mr. Murphy, and he just turned his camera on. Wonderful timing, Mr. Murphy.
Still here, yes. Thank you. Yeah, it's still in development, so specifics are still being worked out, but a tiered model, basically where teacher has first connection, provides the Google Classroom, whatever mechanism to have the ongoing work, and then a daily building level, call it office hours, right, with general staff, not necessarily their 6 teachers, which could be check-in for what's happening in the building, organization, some general support, and then more specified and specialized support throughout the course of the week, which will probably have to change based on how many kids we're talking about. This might be a district-wide model, which turns into a building-wide model, which turns into multiple people in each subject area if things go in one direction, or it might stay a more generalized district-wide model if we're only talking about a handful. But essentially, we're looking at the 4 cores and world languages where there's an expert teacher available for a longer period of time, maybe once a week, maybe twice, where the student would RSVP that they're coming. So we would make sure it's staffed appropriately and that they could come then ask more specific questions, get specific help on that work that their core teacher had already provided to them as a way to kind of just help them stay as connected as possible throughout the course of that. With the shortening of the quarantine period, we might be talking about closer to a week of missed school rather than a full 2 weeks, depending on how the weekends fall. So our main goal is to maintain that connection with them, provide them the material, provide them then support needed, while also protecting the teacher's ability to put the vast majority of their focus from 7:30 to 2:30 on all of those kids that are still sitting in front of them in the classroom.
And I guess a follow-up to that is just as we kick that off and as we have our first students who may quarantine and need to utilize that, will we be requesting feedback from them after their time period just to see what was working and what wasn't for those students to try to improve on anything or, confirm
Yeah,
that it's working?
I think feedback not only from students, but obviously we will, from teachers and from buildings as well, because there's all aspects that are going to let us know how this is going. It's iterative in nature by design, because, you haven't had done this at a district level to this degree before, like it's been said so many times about so many other issues. But this was our collaborative with the teacher group best shot at how to cover as much as possible from the get-go, knowing all along that it might have to adjust as we go if it needs some tweaks or an overhaul. We will listen to those that are involved and continue to collaborate with all of them, student, family, teacher, building administrators, and committees that continue to meet.
And then I guess I have a different question, and I'm not sure who it would be directed to because I don't think it was touched on, but at the secondary level, with the schedule that we're doing, how does that affect any OTEC students?
I think we're going to have to get some information for you on that. I don't know if we have that. We've had discussion on it, but I don't think we have an accurate answer. So we will make sure that we get that posted.
Yeah, I know those students were part of the discussion, but it not being a secondary person in nature, I'd have to get it for you. It did come up, as well as shared staff with the virtual campus came up as well as part of that block scheduling and why we continue to do certain hours on certain days. So
Yeah,
we'll get
one
that
of the
for you.
additional complexities that we're working through with OTEC right now is we do have a small, and I'm not going to say the campus names because I'm afraid I'm going to get it wrong, but we do have a small handful of students that attend a campus in another part of the county as opposed to the one that's closest to the district. So we're working with 2 OTEC campuses, depending on student schedules. OTEC is working with 28 districts and it is trying to determine that. So that's very much in flux and very fluid. And we've found pathways so far, and we anticipate finding a pathway with this new block schedule as well.
Okay. I just want to make sure that they are being covered and they don't drop through the cracks.
They won't. I promise you, they won't.
I see Barb's got a.
Barb.
Yeah, geez, Michelle. I was like, all right, come on. No, I'm just kidding. Talking about quarantine, I'm curious if you can speak to, because I know that we've been in a hybrid model. What can you say about the cases of exposure that we've seen so far in our district? And I've heard from some of the parent community that, our district is communicating what that exposure is based on buildings. But in moving forward and providing the transparency that the community would like to see as a whole, how is that information going to be provided?
Barbara, when you think of this from a district lens and in the conversations you've had, are you looking for, or people in our community looking for just general consensus of what's happening across boundary lines as opposed to just their particular building?
Yeah. I think, I get the sense that parents, of course, obviously are concerned about what's happening within their own building community that their child is in, but the district as a whole, what are we experiencing especially once we go back to that full-time face-to-face model? Because let's face it, we know that there's going to be exposure. And how we deal with it, how we mitigate it, how we make sure, to all of Michelle's questions about dealing with and making sure and ensuring that students who have to quarantine have the services and the follow-up that they need to stay engaged with their classes. So this is something that I think district-wide is an important issue that goes beyond just, making sure we're informing our parent communities within specific buildings.
Other questions or comments?
Yeah,
Andrea?
sorry, I was trying to get to my mute button. Can you, first of all, thank you for the work that has been done to get us to this point. I know that, none of this school year has been easy for any teacher or admin or student or parent. Our students and parents have worked really hard to figure out how to be at home, and so really thank you, parents. To the thousands watching at home, thank you for taking this time that was really tough to help us educate your kids. I wanted to take this minute to just, kind of ask, I know, even tonight we're asking questions that are still saying they're in talks, it's in flux, it's this. And to Barb's question, I would love for us to see, as we are unrolling this, it's the first week of elementary. The next week will be the secondary. Let's keep updating the community on the things that we're talking about that really we're not going to know until we get there, right? We can plan for all these moments, but it's the kids. That's only on paper. It's these strategies have to have the kids in the schools to really walk them out and to know what their masking is going to do and what they're going to do when they're together and what their assigned seating is going to look like and how they're going to manage it. And so, I would love to be able to see not only, we know that as a board we'll get updates, but I think the community really should have some sort of communication as we get into this first couple weeks, maybe after the first week of elementary, and then after that first week of secondary, before we meet again, just to highlight, what's going on, what cases are we seeing? Sure, but what cases aren't we seeing? What success is being seen? I think, like I said, I think we are finally, thankfully, at a spot where all of the parties that are needed in order to be in person 5 days a week are ready and feel safe and are ready to do this. So I'm excited about that. It's really it's been the goal all along. So I'm excited about that, but I want to make sure that we keep that dialogue going of the things that really probably still will be a little fluid. I said to a parent this week, nobody likes to hear that things are fluid and may change. That, if you would like to stress me out and make me feel upset, tell me something's not in my control, right? And that has been all of our existence for the past, it'll be a year in a week and a half, 2 weeks, right? So as much as we don't know, can we talk about what we do know as students are coming in daily across the district?
It's good input. Thank you. We certainly will be happy to do that. And we do anticipate that we will be shifting as we go through this process. And even watching kids get off the bus today and just noting that it's one thing to plan for it, but when you see the driver making sure the child has their backpack and walking in, it's a completely different piece. So there's a lot of observational, anecdotal work that can be done that we can certainly highlight and share out.
I think that a lot of us have had a lot of questions, and the community members have had a lot of questions, whether they're sent to us or sent through the Talk to Us mechanism. And I appreciate the fact that your team took the time to answer with a lot of care many of the questions that have been circulating in the community about some very specific things. I did want to try to put into words a question that I've, not so much heard specifically, but I've read remnants, and I'm reading some of the emails that are coming into us, and I've talked to parents, and I would like to throw this to Corey and Debbie, because I've heard you answer this question for us, and so I really want you to answer this question for the community, because I think it'll be really helpful. when I've asked this question, or when I've heard my colleagues ask this question and I've heard you answer it, it's been helpful to us. And so I think there's an overwhelming wondering of what changed from August to now. And I feel your presentation went through many of the points related to all of the things that have changed, but at different times. So I'm wondering if you could put into words an answer to the question, what changed? Why are we going back now when we couldn't go back in September? And I know I'm not putting you on the spot because I know that, like I said, I've heard you answer this question. So
Sure. You know, the short answer is the understanding of the virus and how it manifests itself within a school setting is much more known. The research behind that, some of the studies that have come out of Michigan State that speak to community transmission versus a full in-person district and a remote district looked very similar. So what is known and what has been shared with us about school-based transmissions exists now. That did not exist in August. Nobody knew. And at the same time in August, and I'm not saying this as an excuse or to throw any part of this under the bus, it was what we had at the time. There wasn't anybody that was willing, and rightfully so, because of unknown from the medical side, to tell us if what we were planning for when instruction was enough to mitigate risk and was enough to keep community transmission down, and if there would be school-based risk. Now, you remember the first time Oakland County Health Division came out and publicly said that was in November, after the state put everybody in the secondary back remote for that 3-week pause, and where cases were at the highest in the county, I believe, or right around the highest per million. They finally said, on the record, that school-based transmission is very low. And I believe the language that was used is school is one of the safest places for our kids to be. So that was a huge change. The biggest shift in terms of guidance from the state was what we received in early to mid-January, in terms of what, again, based on what the medical professionals were telling those that were making those guidance documents to give to school districts, of how you can layer mitigation to limit school-based transmissions, and not a game plan, because how districts are able to layer mitigations look different in each place, and what is happening in each community is different, and there's different variables for everything, but some more tangible pieces that districts could truly evaluate and look at and say, okay, we do have this, we're able to do this to this degree, we're able to do this to this degree. And now we have everybody that's mandated to be in masks that are medically capable. And if you recall, one of the discussions that we were having back in early August is it was not a requirement for our youngest learners. And it did not become a requirement until, I believe, late August, early September. So, the biggest thing, President Boal, has just been the update in the guidance that's been based from the medical side of things. We've been able to benchmark a few districts. There still is not a 3-district high school that is maximizing instructional time at the secondary level that we hope to, and that we're planning for. But those shifts have made it a more tangible conversation. And again, not to go too far back in time, but the initial plan that we had planned for was 5 days of full in-person instruction, with not having any knowns of how the virus would manifest in school. Mrs. Fragamenti?
You did a very nice job, Mr. Heisch. I will take it to the present. The difference as well is the vaccination. Having that opportunity for people to be vaccinated that choose to do so is a huge component. And that aligns with what makes Rochester incredibly special, is our staff members and their resilience and their perseverance and their collaboration to bring questions forward, to ask for help, to ask us to come see their classrooms. That type of partnership brought us to today for our elementary. And we're doing the same thing with our secondary. That is the community of systemness. That is a community moving forward together and ensuring that our compelling why is front and center.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Any other last comments or questions from board members? All right. Thank you for this presentation, both presentations, the budget and the return to learn. We'll move on to the rest of our agenda, additional business. Item 5.1 is citizens present at the meeting. So I have 3 requests from citizens wanting to speak. The first one is from, it looks like Katya Opfer. I think Katya is a student. So Katya, you should be able to speak.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, my name is Katya Opfer and I am a 7th grader at Hart Middle School. I am speaking tonight because I am very worried about going back to school full-time. Rochester Community Schools has a code of conduct. The code states that all students, parents, teachers, and staff have the right to be safe, valued, and respected. First, we are entitled to a physically, emotionally, and intellectually safe learning environment. I do not feel that I will be safe going back to school full-time. Many of my classes have more than 30 kids in them, and we are going to be crammed into small, poorly ventilated, windowless classrooms for 2 hours at a time. Many of these classrooms are much smaller than elementary school classrooms and often have even more kids in them than elementary classes. The district has not provided any details about how we are all going to fit safely into these rooms. We are already sitting less than 3 feet apart at half density. I also don't think we are going to have enough room to spread out at lunchtime. I really like to go to school in the hybrid mode. I get to see my teachers and classmates in person, but I also feel safe because we are at half density. Second, the code states that we are entitled to be valued. I do not feel that our voices are being valued. The district has not asked us, the students, how we feel about going back full-time. I think if you asked us, you would find that a lot of kids feel the same way as I do. Third, the code states that we are entitled to be treated with respect. The definition of respect is to exhibit care, concern, and consideration for someone's needs or feelings. I have been listening to the school board meetings since the school year began. Many parents, teachers, and students have brought up questions and concerns at the meetings and written hundreds of letters and emails to the administration, but hardly anyone gets any response. This is very disrespectful of our needs and feelings, and I do not think our opinions are being heard. I would like to ask the district to stay in hybrid mode until it is safer to return full-time and when more people are vaccinated. Maybe there is a way for us to go to school 5 days a week, but for half days. So one cohort goes in the morning and the other cohort goes in the afternoon with no lunch. This would keep us at half density, but also give us more in-person learning time. Not everyone likes hybrid, but maybe there are ways to make it better. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Katya. Next, I have Jamie Moore. Jamie followed by Andrew Weaver. Jamie, you should be unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'd just like to thank you and the district for getting our young learners back to school. Today was one of the best days my first grader has had in almost an entire year. Thank you to our amazing teachers, parapros, administrators, custodial staff, food service staff, bus drivers, crossing guards, and everyone who made this possible. Even through the masks, I could see a lot of smiles at pickup and drop off today. It was wonderful and such a long time coming. In response to the previous comment, I appreciate the district offering multiple options, including virtual and in person. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Andrew Weaver. Andrew is followed by Lori Baggett.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So, wow, lots of options to go here. So we'll start with addressing Corey's most recent misinformation. So he just spoke on what changed from August to now and kind of rambled on about a few things and information. Let's all remember in September, the nurse got on one of these calls and flat out said, the reason we did not go back was because we were unsure what the flu was going to do to the healthcare system. We could have gone back then. So again, what changed? The governor put out the date March 1st. So the district scrambled and said, all right, we got to do something. So all the other stuff was complete nonsense. As far as the vaccine goes, again, many of us in our community have had to go to work for a long time without the vaccine. Again, my wife is a teacher. I have great respect for teachers. They are not entitled to something that no one else is entitled to. So great, the vaccine's coming, that's fine. That is not why our kids should not be in school. But if you're finally willing to admit that that is the reason our kids were not back in school, that would be nice if you were honest about that. As far as the other part, Michelle, I appreciate that you actually asked real questions. That was the first time since it started that you actually pushed back on, again, simple, basic things. Why are our kids not being allowed to spread out using every available inch of that facility? And to think we're not doing it because someone might have to change the trash can. Again, I'm pretty sure we can find answers to those scenarios. But I do have to question you at the beginning. You mentioned all the emails, but you didn't mention the one I sent on 2/5 that everyone received about the lawyer reaching out to me. You didn't mention the one on 2/13 about the district lying to the community about why it canceled sports, claiming they used data for lost instruction time when that data does not exist. Everyone on the board received that one. 2/14, again, reaching out about the district lawyer using fear tactics. You all were copied on that one as well. 2/18, the board members discussing the virtual campus and the issues that it caused. So again, it's blatantly honest when provable things can be shown to be false or the lies that are going on. I just don't get why this continued approach to say stuff and do stuff that you know is untrue and to think it's not going to get called out at this point. And then again, Kevin, Mike, Scott, thanks for showing up. You guys added a lot of value today. I'm good.
Lori Baggett, followed by David Arthurs. Lori, you should be allowed to unmute.
Hi, this is Lori Baggett. I have two sons at Stony Creek High School, and I guess I wanted to make 3 points. Number one, I think that the community and the families should be acknowledged more so than anybody else in this whole situation. We have had to step up. We have had to quit jobs. We have had to change schedules, sit at desks with our children all day while they're in virtual, hold the hands, do homework, etc. We have had to accommodate our kids being home from school. So I think that families are owed a very big thank you, considering how resilient and how we have persevered and how we have brought ideas to the table to help our students to learn during this last year of non-learning from RCS. Number two, I want to thank you for still allowing the virtual option for families like the young lady who just spoke, who have the opportunity to stay home and learn through a virtual option, and they do not need to be scared and have to go to campus. So I appreciate you guys continuing to do that, and I would absolutely help in any way. I am an online professor, and I think that the community at large would help you to improve the virtual option if you ever need it. So I would welcome that you guys send out, maybe some information to the community on how we can assist. And the third thing is that to feel valued and respected and cared and concerned and have consideration for our children. I know that my sons returned home from school today, and they were the happiest that I have seen them in a very long time. They felt very cared for at school by their teachers. They felt very considered and very important once again. And we have really appreciated that in my family, and I'm sure all the families listening. So just wanted to let you know that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And finally, we have David Arthurs.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, I'm going to make it quick. First, can I get a show of hands of any one of you that have at least one child in the RCS district?
Several of us.
If you have any child that's currently in the school system.
Several of us have students in the district, multiple students.
Okay, good. So there are some of you that at least have skin in the game. What I'm trying to understand, I kind of want to just add a little bit more to the student that spoke earlier. What I don't understand is there's physical limitations for the classrooms. We can't build them out. So in order to mitigate, everyone wears masks and you do the best that you can. And I get that. But what I don't understand is why would you have students stay in school from 7:30 to 2:30 instead of letting them out at 12:30 or 1:30 and then they can go home for lunch, instead of having them arm's length away from each other, talking and doing whatever you're supposed to do when you're eating lunch. And we do know from September to now that this is an airborne disease. Why would you have someone that is so close to you, not a mask, not an adult? We're dealing with adolescents here. Why? What would be the point of having them do that lunch? You can do a good job of having them in the classrooms. A lot of students are scared about the hallways because there's hard to get movement there, whatever. But why would you introduce something like having 6 kids or whatever sitting at a table, laughing and enjoying themselves and possibly spreading COVID-19? That's something that is in your control. The layout of the buildings is not in your control. All you can do is do the best that you can with the layout that you have. But why would you intentionally expose the children unnecessarily? Because they can still, the parents, if the kids are set on the school lunches, they can still come to the school and pick them up on Wednesday afternoons. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I think that is all the comments that we have currently. So I'm going to open it up to members of the administration. Any other comments?
Thank you, Kristen. I would just like to do a personal shout out to our PTA and our first virtual Founders Day. I have my pin on proudly, and congratulations to all the recipients. And thank you so much for keeping that legacy program moving forward. It was a lovely evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Agree with the shout out to the PTA. Any other comments from the administration? Any comments from board or comments from board members? Michelle.
I would like to tell Andrew Weaver that that was solely my fault for not reporting those, that I had written them down in a separate area and I did not include those. But I also wanted to, as the liaison to RIA, Rochester Area Youth Assistance, I just wanted to remind people that on March 2nd, Becky Savage from the 525 Foundation will be speaking about what everyone should know about the use and misuse of alcohol and prescription drugs. And that's in conjunction with the Rochester Hills Public Library. And you can sign up through the library, or a link to that, I believe, should be coming out in the next day or so. Thank you. Oh, you know what? And one other thing, sorry. The Michigan Association of School Boards has written a resolution as well that we might want to consider on March 8th that talks about, our desire to be able to meet in person for meetings. And after, if we did decide to do that and pass it, then we could forward that to the governor and the legislature to attempt to have that change so that we could meet in person.
Thank you. And I apologize, I missed, I saw one of our speakers' hands was raised and I thought it was just raised from earlier, but I am gonna let Katya Opfer speak. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to add that I have been in the virtual campus and it did not work for me at all. I want to be at school. I just want to be safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the board or administrations? And I think we did a really good job, actually, Consetta, of going through the upcoming announcements of everything that's happening in the next month or so. Those are also available on the district website and the new calendar platform that's on the homepage. And if there is no further business, I will take a motion to adjourn the meeting at 9:26, moved by Mike, seconded by Michelle. All those in favor, please unmute and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And that is a 7-0 vote. Meeting adjourned at 9:26. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.